User acceptance testing for Drupal with Behat Mink. Has anybody done any user acceptance testing? Know what it is?
Not with Behat
That's
Mink.
what it was before you got here.
Do you do? Does anybody do any testing at all when they do development?
We should.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I know that we should, but and Drupal presents a bunch of challenge. Drupal 7 presents a bunch of challenges for that. But does anybody actually write any tests?
No.
When they're doing their development, you just kind of fly by the seat of your pants. That's what 99% of folks do, I think. And
The clients never have a budget for it.
well, that's
Or time.
you can argue that. It's difficult in Drupal. It's arduous. The built-in testing framework that's built into Drupal is Simple Test. And I don't know if you've ever tried to run any of the tests that are built into Drupal core, but that's also painful. I've never actually completely run the entire test suite because I think after about an hour I decided that this wasn't worth the effort, and so I just stopped it. But you can write unit tests using Simple Test, and when I do write code that I'm contributing back to the community, I try to write some tests for that. But in general, for client work, I find myself skipping the unit test piece unless I've got a very complex piece of business logic that I'm trying to code, and then I'll write unit tests for those specific things. But I won't write unit tests for everything that I'm doing or web. Or
you very
web
quickly
test.
hit the limit of what's useful for unit tests.
Yes.
It's useful for certain things, but very quickly it becomes more trouble than it's
Yeah, if
worth.
you're doing something that requires that you do some complex calculations, then unit tests are useful for testing your logic and making sure that you're getting there, and that you've got your coding right. But other than that, that pretty much for testing business logic, it's good. But for testing user interface type stuff, it actually falls down. Simple Test, which is built into Drupal core, has the ability for you to do some user interface testing, but it's limited, and it's very. It takes a lot of lines of code to get, when I go here and I click here and I log here, then I should see this on the page, and you have to write a lot of code to get that test to actually.
And it's very
work.
brittle.
Yes, it's very brittle. So user acceptance testing, it actually grew. It has its roots in agile software development, and the whole thing. When you started out writing tests, everyone wrote unit tests, and then we evolved a little bit and we did what's called test-driven development, where we actually wrote our unit tests before we started coding, and that got us some discipline around a test-driven development type process. But a lot of folks would still sit down and go, okay, what is it that I need to write a test for? And the majority of people probably still write their test after they start coding, which is not actually the way that you're supposed to do it. So there was a thought process about early 2000 where somebody stepped back, somebody I can't think of the guy's name off the top of my head, that's real big in the agile community, agile process community, stepped back and said, we should be coding for what the client's asking for. And so basically, the thought process there was to come up with a way to write tests that verify that that what you're coding does what the client's asked you to do. And so that's where user acceptance testing comes in. It doesn't replace unit testing, it enhances unit testing. It's the next level up. And you use it to verify that the solution that you're writing works for your clients. Ideally, user acceptance tests are written by the business customer. So your client actually should be involved in writing unit tests or writing user acceptance tests if you're doing it according to agile development methods. And the whole key with user acceptance tests is that they're expressed in a business domain language. You're writing those tests in a language that is very understandable by the client. And because it's understandable by the client, you can actually hand those written tests off to the client. They can read them and they can understand what it is that the test is doing, and you can get their sign off on them. This is the thing that kind of turned the lights on for me. It's like, okay, if I've given a set of acceptance tests to a client and the client has signed off and said, yes, when you accomplish all these things, then this component of the project that you're working on, I'll consider that complete. Well, that's huge, because then there's no ambiguity about what it is that you're coding for. So business domain language. So pretty much it's written in the business speak of the client's business world or their domain. A business domain language is geared toward being business readable. So the client should be able to understand it, and it's designed to bridge the gap, the communication gap between the product owner or the client and the developers by expressing the requirements or the tests in a language that both sides should be able to understand. Why is this important? Well,
I love this one.
yeah, I know. So here's how the customers explained it when they sit down and tell you what it is they want you to develop. And then here's how the business consultant that's brought this customer to the table has described what it is that the client wants. And this is how the project leader, or which for those of you that are running a single shop, that may be you, or if you've got a project manager, this is how the project manager understands it. And this is how the analyst here, or the designer, as it might be, designed it. And this is what you programmed, and this is what they really needed. So it's to get you out of this. This will help to get you out of this.
And
So,
the thing is, that cartoon's been written since like the mid-80s.
yeah. And I've
It hasn't changed in all those years.
And when I was doing research on agile development and tester and development, user acceptance testing, that cartoon cropped up over and over and over and over again. In fact, the guy that did the presentation on Behat at DrupalCon Portland 2 years ago used that in his presentation also. So what's the benefit of doing user acceptance testing? Okay, well, you can increase your mutual understanding of objectives between you and your client. You will increase the odds that the application you're developing actually meets clients' expectations, and you'll increase customer satisfaction. All of those are positive things. All of those ensures that you get paid for the work that you do.
It's very important.
Yes. So crafting good acceptance tests. It starts with a user story, and if you've done any work, if you know anything about agile development at all, pretty much there's a big component of it centers around user stories. So basically, a user story is the smallest piece of functionality on your project that adds business value. And a good user story is the feature set of your project. So a user story might be managing a user. As a user, I need to manage my user profile. As a user, that's a member of this site, I need to manage my user profile. And then all of your acceptance tests will be written around testing all of the components of managing the user's profile. Structure of a user story is typically expressed in as a user who, and this is a target user role, has a need. I as a user have a need in order to gain a benefit. That's pretty much how a user story is structured. Good user stories are almost always written by the customer. You can help them craft them, but the user stories really do need to be written by the customer if you're trying to get the customer's buy-in on your test. You don't have to do this in order to do user acceptance testing, but this is where the real benefit of doing user acceptance testing comes in, is you get your buy-in from the customer. So a good user story example might be, as a student, I want to purchase a parking pass so I can park on campus without getting a ticket or getting towed. That might be your user story. And then if you're selling parking passes in an online system somewhere, all of your acceptance tests will revolve around a student purchasing that parking pass, successfully purchasing that and receiving that parking pass. So user stories are prioritized in agile development, typically by the client. And that prioritization is based on business importance for the client, with feedback from the development team, because sometimes there's components that aren't important to the client but are fundamental to have in place before the client's business needs can be met. So you have to kind of help guide them, but they need to be the one that sets the priorities, and the highest degree priority items get worked on first. Okay. Once you've got your user stories down, the next thing comes your acceptance criteria, and this is where things start to get interesting for us as developers. Typically, acceptance criteria is written before programming starts. And it defines the specific functional aspects of the user story. So in order for a student to purchase this parking pass, what does the student need to be able to do if they're going on an online system to do that? So, and then you start saying, okay, well, I need to be able to log in. When I click on this, I should see this form. When I fill out this form, it should ask me for the credit card. When I fill in the credit card, if it's a valid number, it needs to do this. If it's an invalid number, I need to do that. I need to provide feedback to the user. And pretty much your feature set is complete when all of your acceptance criteria is met, or in our case, when all of the acceptance tests for that feature are passed. That's when you've completed coding that particular feature, when you've met all of your acceptance tests. So this kind of gets you out of the realm of coding things because they're cool, or coding things that don't have a business value. So that goes back to the whole user story. The user story is structured around specifying the business value for the feature that the client's asking for. So the structure of acceptance criteria is, given that I am a user, and there's and maybe it's a user that is logged in as a student. Maybe it's a user that's logged in as an admin. Maybe it's a user that's logged in as an author, if it's a site where you're publishing data. When I do this, the user performs an action, then I should see an observable result. And this is called a scenario. And each of the above components of that scenario are a step. And I'm giving you some jargon here that's going to start pulling all this together when we start looking at Behat. So a feature is comprised of a user story and its supporting acceptance criteria. As a Drupal developer, how do I get there? Well, you start with Behat. Okay, so Behat's a testing framework written in PHP, and Behat accepts tests that are written in business domain language. And executes those tests on your application, and it's designed to test the behavior of your application. So when I log in and do this and click this and put in this input, then I should see this, and Behat can test all that. Behat works with another application called Mink. And Mink's an open source browser controller emulator for web applications. It's also written in PHP. And it integrates with Behat because Behat is written to be, it has plugins or extensions. And there is an extension written for Behat called the Mink extension that actually plugs Mink into Behat. I've never seen a presentation on Behat where Mink wasn't coupled with it. So for doing web development applications, pretty much you're going to install Behat, and you're going to have the Mink extension running somewhere. So you're going to have Mink installed as well. So what does Mink provide? Well, Mink provides predefined steps. Here we are back to those steps again, that comprise the components of an acceptance test. And each step maps to a PHP callback that contains the actual code that runs the test. And so Mink has a bunch of predefined tests that are written out specifically for doing things that you would do with a web application. When I go to this URL, when I click on this link, when I select this button, when I put this input, all those things are already predefined, and Mink knows how to actually execute those steps as actual actions on an application. By default, it uses curl to do that. But you can also use some browser emulators that can run from Selenium, and also some static browser emulators that don't have JavaScript involved with them that run in a different type of emulator. Okay, but I just talked about PHP coding, and I said a few minutes ago that the tests were written in business speak, and they are, using a language called Gherkin.
I told you it was cucumber related.
Yeah.
Like there's a
Gherkin,
similar one.
Gherkin is a business-readable, domain-specific language created specifically for crafting behavior descriptions. And this came out of, has its roots with Cucumber. Behat's actually crafted after Cucumber. It's the PHP version of Cucumber. for the PHP development community, Cucumber's for the Ruby community. You could run acceptance tests in Cucumber if you wanted to, but we're PHP developers, so if we wanted to do some custom tests, it's a lot easier for us. Unless you've got a Ruby background, it's heck of a lot easier for us to write those steps if we need to do custom steps in PHP than to have to go learn Ruby in order to write them. And these behavior descriptions serve as both your product documentation and your acceptance tests, because if you've got a well-crafted set of acceptance tests, it says exactly what your application is supposed to and not supposed to be doing. Behat does all the work. Features, which are user stories and acceptance tests, are written in Gherkin, and they're composed of steps. The steps are actually parsed by Behat using regular expressions and mapped to PHP callbacks. Those callbacks execute the code that powers the acceptance test and also runs Mink. And then Mink runs the browser simulations to test your application. Behat is pluggable through extensions. We talked a little bit about that a few minutes ago. The Mink extension is a Behat plugin. The Mink extension, which is written in object-oriented PHP, is also extendable, and the Drupal community has extended it. And we have the Behat Drupal extension. How many people have heard of this? No. Okay. Have you?
Yeah.
Have you used it?
I haven't. The Behat was one of those things that's really high on my list of things to do. I checked it, did it, and listened to a bunch of podcasts about it. I was like, really high on my list. And so when you said, I want to do Behat, I'm like, you're on that on the next one.
Yeah, when I went to Johnny's presentation at Chattanooga Drupal Camp, that Behat got pushed to the top of my list. So basically, the Behat Drupal extension is an integration layer between Behat, the Mink extension, and Drupal. And what the Behat extension does, or what the Drupal extension does, is it provides some additional Drupal-specific steps and the corresponding PHP callbacks to the base step collection provided by the Mink extension. So the Mink extension brings, things like when I visit this URL, when I click on this button, when I fill in these fields. The Drupal extension goes a little bit farther and does things that are Drupal specific. With the Drupal extension, if you're running it in certain, and there's 3 modes you can run it in, but when you run it in certain modes, you can say, if I am a user with the administrator role, and the coding is already there to go to your application, create that user, give them the administrator role, log you in as that user, all by specifying a step that says, when I am a user with the administrator role, and all that work's already been done for you. You don't have to write a single line of PHP code. All right, who's ready to play? Did anybody do any of the homework to go ahead and install Composer and Drush on your local machines?
Oh, they're already done. I think we've done that. I think most people have done that for most people.
Okay, if anybody wants to do hands-on, let's do some hands-on stuff. If not,
we had a session of let's get Composer installed on everyone's machine.
Okay, good.
And then let's install Drush via Composer, because that's how we're supposed to do it now.
Okay. All right, to install the Drupal extension, you need to have Composer and Drush, and you need to have them available in your environment path. And so the very first thing you're going to do, you actually create a composer.json file for your project in the root folder of your Drupal installation. So wherever your index.php file is for your Drupal installation, that's where you're going to put your composer.json file. And pretty much this is what is going to be in it for Drupal 7. You're going to require the Drupal extension, and you're going to specify where Behat gets installed. And then you will run this from Composer install, and Composer will go out and get all of the dependencies that you need in order to install Behat and Mink and all of the other extensions that you need plugged in order for the Drupal extension and those Drupal tests to work.
Every time I do this, I come off with a grin on my face going, I love Composer!
I know, it's great. And pretty much after you set up your composer.json file, you just do Composer install. Or if you do Composer set up to run as a script, you can do php composer.far install. So I had mentioned a few minutes ago that the Drupal extension, you can run it in 3 different modes, and one of those is what's called the black box mode. And you can actually write and run acceptance tests against a live site using the black box mode, because you don't do anything that will damage the data. You can log in as a user and do things, but it would be just like you logging in as a user and doing something. So if you need to test, if you have a client that picks up the phone and calls and says, this is not showing up on such and such page on my site. If you've got acceptance tests that you've already written, you can actually run those tests in black box mode against their site and see if it's breaking down. And one of the things you can do with Behat with certain plugins is you can actually capture screenshots as your acceptance tests are running.
I didn't realize you could do
yeah,
that.
you can write. It's a hook that you can write, and there's a function. It depends on what you're using for your browser. If you're using Selenium plugin, if you're using Phantom.js or whatever you're using as your browser emulator, your screenshot capture will be slightly different. But if you can set it up as a post hook, and that gets called if the test fails. I usually set mine up so that if the test fails, it'll trigger, and then capture the screen, so that then I can look at the test that failed. I can see the screenshot of what was going on the screen at the time that test was running, and I can visually see what wasn't there that was supposed to be there, or what happened that wasn't supposed to happen with that screenshot. And you can also do some other things where you can make Behat pause during tests, and then you can look at the browser and see what's going on at a certain place. I'm not going to go into any of that tonight because we'd be here all night doing all this stuff. But yeah, there's all kinds of really cool things that you can do to actually help you with your testing process.
So it's installing. Where exactly is it installing it?
In your .composer generally.
Wherever you're, no.
Wherever the root directory is.
Oh,
I'm in.
You've created a new .composer file, haven't you? So wherever that is.
I installed a new.
Wherever that composer.json file is.
Okay. It's only going to run wherever that file is, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Those are installed. That command.
Yeah. What you'll do is typically your composer.json file will go with your project, and I actually commit mine to the code repository, but I exclude these 2 folders. I put those in my git ignore.
There's no point in,
Yeah.
because you can just run composer install and it pulls them all anyway.
Right. Now there are some folders that get created that I do commit, but these.
Well, they
these I
say
don't.
your .lock file you should do, then everyone gets the same versions.
Right.
Then if there's a version released between your composer install and my composer install, it'll look for the .lock file and actually do those versions. And then when one person upgrades and says it works, you can push it, and then everyone gets the same ones again, which is actually quite a neat little way of keeping everyone in sync with the least amount of trouble. Because we all know that's always a problem.
All right. So when you've run your composer.json file, done your installation, you should have these 2 directories. You should have a bin directory, which is going to contain the Behat executable. And then you just have a vendor directory, which is where all of those dependencies got downloaded. And if you've got this and you're running it on a Drupal project, you'll want to add these 2 to your git ignore file if you're using Git as your code repository. Now you need to define your test environment. We do that with a behat.yaml file. This, again, goes in the root directory. And we're specifying some things here. The tests that we're going to run, I told you, against Drupal.org. You don't actually have to have a Drupal installation locally to do this. But we're specifying a few things so that Behat knows where to find stuff. One of those is where your features are going to be. And when we run, we've got one more command to run that will actually create this. So we're going to store all of our features that we're going to write in a directory called features. This directory you will want to commit with your code, because this is where all of your scenarios and your acceptance tests are going to be. And then we're going to specify where the Mink extension, what sort of browser emulators we're going to use, and we're going to use Gert and Selenium too. And then the URL for the site that you're going to test. I've got xp.local.com in this one, but we're going to put www.drupal.org. in there. And then for the Drupal extension, we're going to run it in black box mode. Since we're going to be running the first set of tests that we do against Drupal.org, we're not actually going to do anything that will create users and roles and that sort of thing on the database. We're just going to do some basically clicking around and looking for certain things to be in certain places. So once you get your behat.yaml file set up, and this is a YAML file, so you're going to have to use spaces and no tabs and all of that kind of fun stuff. Then you'll want to initialize your test environment. You do that with bin/behat-init. And this is going to do a couple of things. It'll create the features folder. It will create a features context.php file, which if you need to write any custom steps for any of the scenarios and acceptance tests that you have written, that's where you're going to put the code for those. The hook that I was talking to you about, Lee, that will do the screenshots, you'll put that in the features context.php file. And then any setup that you might need to do if you actually need to do some pre-setup on a Drupal installation before you run tests, then you can do your setup and teardown in that features context.php file.
And everyone's going to have to learn to love YAML because Drupal
Yes.
8's all about YAML.
Yes. Yeah, this is probably the thing that I beat my head on the wall yesterday when I was trying to do the setup, the installation for this presentation, because I kept getting it kept failing, and it was because I had a tab instead of a space in my in my YAML file, and it took me forever to figure out what it was that was causing it to
You said
fail.
you want us to do Google.
www.drupal.org instead of xp.local.com. That's the local site that I've got set up on my machine. And this is there can also be a lot more information in your .yaml file, but this is the bare minimum that you're going to need to have in there in order to run tests in black box mode. So when you run that, you should get a features directory. And that features directory is where we're going to put all of our scenarios, our features, which is going to have be composed of a user story and a scenario, and they're going to be written in Gherkin. And then features/bootstrap features context.php. That's where if you have to write any custom steps, if you have to code any of the PHP callbacks for the custom steps, you'll put them in this feature context.php file. And it will extend the Drupal extension context. So one change that you will need to make, because Behat assumes that you are extending the Behat context when you set up a project. Because we're using the Drupal extension, we want to make a change to our feature context file, and we want to replace our class definition in there. Change it from extending the Behat context to extending Drupal/Drupal extension/context/Drupal context, and then just save it.
And all those slashes are the new PHP namespaces.
That's namespaces.
You'll see them everywhere now in PHP. It's PSR4.
Or
Well, isn't PSR 0? I think
Actually-
is a style guide. PSR1 is namespacing, or PSR2 is, and it's the long form. And then PSR4 is people got pissed off with the long form, and PSR4 is actually a short form of PSR2, I think. Or
yeah, and you can actually put this up there, and you could put use Drupal extension context, Drupal context at the top, and then just say feature context extends Drupal context. Let's look at some of the predefined steps that we get with the Drupal extension and the Mink extension. I'm actually gonna. I think I'm almost done here. Now I've actually got a Drupal installation here, but I'm gonna be running.
Accessibility. Somehow, Joe at work
Yeah,
keeps
we'll look
making
at those in
Chromebooks
just a
be
second.
accessible at like 200%. He's like, I don't know what I keep doing. I was like, stop pressing read buttons.
Now I've got a lot more stuff in my YAML file, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
thank you.
need to
Yeah,
edit
there's
a
no
couple.
good place for those cookies, though.
Yes, there is.
Well, no, because no matter where you're going to put it, people's going to want to eat them.
Well, he said yes, there is.
I have to remember my belly.
He teaches this.
See, since it's in this, it won't do it. Hey, nope. Chrome OS has a, if you hit Control-Alt question mark, it'll pop up a virtual keyboard, and then you can start hitting buttons to see what it does.
Ben, Behat. Now, you can get descriptive list, which is -DL, or you can get descriptive information, which will give you more stuff. So if we look at DL, all these are the predefined steps that are available with the Drupal extension and the Mink extension for Behat. All of those are already pre-written. These are the regular expressions that are used to parse the Gherkin statements. And all of those are already pre-written and mapped to test functions that perform those particular actions. So when I visit, and that is a path on your website to a certain page. When I click a link for this particular field, when I enter this value, when if I need to wait for Ajax to finish. Let's see, and we get a little further down here and we start seeing some stuff that's going to be a little more Drupal specific. All of those, this when I should see error message containing, all of those were provided by the Drupal extension. When we're talking about vocabulary terms, when I'm viewing a vocabulary term with the name this, that comes built in with the Drupal extension. When I'm viewing my node with the title this, that comes from the Drupal extension. So you specify that you're viewing a particular type of node with a title of this, and it knows to surf to pull up the node page that has that particular title. There's some components there if you run it in Drush mode, it'll actually execute Drush commands for you.
Then print last Drush output.
And then there's the moving forward and backwards one page, that comes from the Mink extension. Filling in certain things with values comes from the Mink extension. The response status codes, those are all provided by the Mink extension. Clicking checkboxes or checking to see if boxes are checked or unchecked. A lot of those are coming from the Mink extension. The Drupal extension provides you about 30% more steps that are already predefined that do things that are Drupal specific. So if you want to see more information, you can use bin/behat-di, and you'll get information that's actually specified in the comments. It'll actually spit those out. So you can provide more descriptive information. So that particular Behat statement will check that a checkbox that's specified with a certain value is checked, or that it's unchecked. That a form field with a specified ID doesn't have a specified value.
So those values where checkbox, the specified value, is that like a CSS class, or is that actually just the text on it?
It depends upon how you want to specify it.
Oh,
you can actually use a CSS selector to select it. You can use the name value for the checkbox.
Okay,
Put a few
that's
there.
good.
Yeah. Let's see. So these are all of the steps. Now we're all still looking at stuff here that may seem like it's still a little bit Greek, but if we actually want to look at what a set of what a feature is going to look like, we'll look at one here that's called Black Box, which is one I've set up that's going to run. I think there's maybe 6 tests in it that it will run against Drupal.org that will do certain things. So let's see, Black Box feature. This is what a feature actually looks like. So the very top here where we've got feature, this is just a description, and this particular feature is we're going to test Drupal context. In order to prove the Drupal context using the black box driver is working properly, as a developer, I need to use the step definitions of this context. Okay, that's my user story. And then the scenarios are actually the different acceptance tests that we're going to run, and we're going to run this against Drupal.org. If you go to the Drupal extension for Behat on Drupal.org, the project, and you actually pull that project from the repository, you'll get some YAML files that have all these steps in there. Or you'll get some feature files that have all these steps already written out for you if you want to play with them. That's all I did to get these. I didn't sit down and write all these. These were already written. So we're going to run a couple of scenarios against Drupal.org. We're going to test the ability to find a heading in a region. So here's the way that my test is written. Given I'm on the home page, when I click download and extend, then I should see the heading core in the content region. That's your test. That's your test. That's the test. That's English. That's
English.
right. That's Gherkin.
Your clients can write. You can teach.
That's what you
You can
write.
teach your clients to write their own tests.
Why do they call it Gherkin?
Because the original one was written for Ruby was called Cucumber, so it's a joke.
It's all
Like a
yeah,
lot of naming things in
all-
software, it's
all
a
of
joke.
all of it's related to fruits and vegetables.
Which is why there's like there was the Born shell, then there's Bash, which is actually the Born Again shell, which is what Bash actually stands for. And there was Yak was one of the original lexical compilers. When they wrote an open source version of it, it's called Bison. Just because bisons are kind of yak. Yeah, and like C++ is technically a joke as well. C++ is it's one better than C. Yeah.
I feel really sorry for the kids who just come in the middle of this.
Yeah.
I'm not too far from the beginning and I get lost. So,
But when you remember when I talked a little bit earlier about things being written in business domain language,
Yeah.
this is what I'm talking about. You can hand this to a client. They're going to know what you're talking about. If you handed them a PHP unit test, they're going to go, okay. But if you hand them this, you're telling them exactly what you're testing for and what they should expect to see. And you can do negative testing too. You can test for, I should see this, but I shouldn't see that, which we'll look at some of those in just a minute. So that's your acceptance test. The
And you-
hat parses this, maps it using those regular expressions that we were looking at just a minute ago in the steps, back to the callbacks that actually execute the test. But this is what you write. And what you'll find is that as you write and develop your steps, your custom steps, then your step library starts to grow, and you find that you're doing less and less coding.
so basically
For
you're
tests.
developing while creating the test.
Yeah, yes.
Then when you get to the end,
But with the Mink extension and the Drupal extension for Behat, you already get a bunch of these already coded for you. So you have a whole bunch of steps that are already written, and you can start writing tests without having to do any test coding.
And you know
You
the
just do
Drupal
the
guys are going to
steps.
share all the other ones back in. I bet you that's
Yes.
been going on already.
Yes, it is. A lot more so for Drupal 8. But you actually have the ability for Drupal 7 if you want to write a set of steps. It's called, I think they're called subcontexts. You can actually commit that with your extension, and then if you install that extension, you'll get all of the Behat tests specific for that Drupal extension. If you can find anybody that's written any. I haven't found an extension that has any Behat tests written with it.
Oh.
But you have the ability to do that because the Drupal extension is also pluggable. And the way that the logic is written in the Drupal extension is it will look for those. You just have to give it a specific name, and it will look for those YAML files.
Okay. I mean, I particularly love the Behat idea because you can get your client to write his own acceptance tests.
Yes. You don't have to be a programmer to write these. You need to have a technical mindset. So you may actually need to have someone that's helping the client craft these.
the project manager.
Exactly. That's the perfect job for a project manager. Somebody that's got a technical mindset but doesn't necessarily know the intricacies of coding in Drupal, but they can sit down with a client and do this.
Yeah.
And then when you get these all written out, you get them from the project manager, your tests are already written. And for the ones that aren't written, Behat will actually tell you, I parsed this, but I didn't find this scenario, so this one's undefined. Here's the regular expression that needs to map to this. Here's what this particular test function needs to be called, so it gives you a stub for it. You can stick it in your feature context file and write the code for that particular test. So these are the scenarios and the acceptance tests that we're going to run on Drupal.org. So we're going to look for certain things on the download and extend page, and we're going to get to the download and extend page by going to the home page, and then we're going to go to the download page, and we're going to click on the link called About Distributions in the content region, and then we're going to look for this status in the sidebar, and we're going to look for this link in the footer. And if I find those two things, then that test is going to pass. And these are very simple examples. This just kind of gives you an idea you can do with acceptance testing.
Can you nest them on how scenarios?
What you can't nest the scenarios, but what you can do is you can have multiple steps. So you can say, given I'm on the home page, when I click on download extend, then I should see this, and I should see this, and I should see this, but I should not see this. So if you're wanting to look to see if maybe if an error message pops up on the page, and if everything happens successful, you shouldn't be seeing that error message, you can actually look for that error message, and if the error message is there, then the test will fail. So viewing content in a region, given I'm on the home page, then I should see come for the software, stay for the community in the left header. If we see those things, that test will pass. We're going to test the ability to find text that should not appear. So we're going to go to the home page and make sure that this text is not on the home page. So if you've got a live site and you're periodically publishing information to the home page, say you've got sales this week, you've got a commerce site and you've got a block where you publish sales this week, and you know what's supposed to show up on that block on Thursday. You can write your test to test that site and see that those things are actually showing up in that block on Thursday, and if they're not, the test fails and you get flagged and says, hey, the stuff that's supposed to be showing up in the on sale block is not showing up in the on sale block, and then you know to go and look and see what happened. Why did my sales not get deployed on Thursday? And in that particular instance, that test may only be valid on Thursday, but you could actually write those ahead of time. We're going to try to submit, we're going to actually do a search. We're going to search on Drupal.org for the word views in the search box, and then we're going to look for certain things to show up on the search results page. And then we're going to look for a link that should not ever be there. We're going to go to the user page, and we're going to click the login button without filling in a username or password, and we're going to look for the presence of error messages. And then we're going to go to the register page and do the same thing. And these, I think there's 6, maybe 7 scenarios we've got there. These are all tests. But you can see how English-like everything is. So you can hand this off to a client. There should be, you're a whole lot more likely to be on the same page looking at this than you are looking at PHP code.
When they sign off, it's basically they're saying this is anything
There's
other than this.
step-by-step directions.
Right.
Anything other than this is extra.
Right. So back to the example we were talking about earlier about the student purchasing the parking pass. So that would be your feature description up here. So that's your user story, and then the scenarios would be all the tests that you would run on that particular feature set. And when all those tests pass, you've coded that feature. Johnny Fox was telling me that he actually sits down and writes the tests for a project when they're working on the next iteration. They do agile development, and when they're planning their next code sprint and they pull the user stories that they're going to develop for that particular code sprint, then he'll write the acceptance tests and commit those to the code repository, and then the developer that's working on that particular feature will pull the acceptance test, and they start their coding, and they run their feature tests, and they code, and they run their feature tests. And when all of those feature tests pass, they're done coding. And they mark that particular feature set as complete and ready for review, and everything's committed back. And if and they can post along the way as they're doing their commits, how far along in the feature set they are. And they've also developed a plugin, and I've asked him for the code. He hasn't shared it yet. Where he can specify, he can write the tests ahead of time, but knowing that certain components aren't ready to be coded yet, they can specify a skip tag on those particular tests, and Behat will skip those until they're ready to code them. So he said he would share it, but he hasn't sent it to me yet. So I need to pester him a little bit for those. All right, so we've looked at some tests. We've seen the examples. We've got Behat installed. We've configured it to run on Drupal.org. So let's run these tests and see what happens. Let me make sure. I want to check one thing before I do this. I don't want to run the API tests on Drupal.org, so. I'm going to move those. To run the test, you simply do bin Behat, and it starts executing. And it basically ran 8 tests, 27 steps. It ran them in 6 seconds, and they all passed. Every single one of those were run against Drupal.org.
What do we see when one fails?
Yeah, I was just fixing to edit the file and do a failure. So let's see. Black box.
And then you can schedule it.
Do,
Right, Chrome jobs.
Chrome, yeah. You
I'm
can
guessing
schedule it, like you said.
Chrome or
Check
Jenkins or-
sale went up.
mm-hmm. You could, yeah. Let's see. Given I'm on the home page, when I click download and extend, let's say, then I should see the heading cord. We'll change that to cord. In content region. Oh, okay. Did I not save that?
I think you put out of it.
I may have. Okay, let's see.
You know, what if-
Oh, I know what I did. I edited the one in my root. Sorry.
In command mode, you can just hit R and then the letter to replace.
It goes to JHOF, and I use Vim. So, okay. So that particular scenario should fail because when you go to download and extend, you shouldn't see the word cord in the content region. So. Really?
You're down directly, yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Red
I'll,
button
red.
pressed.
yep. Yep. See, we had a test that failed. It says the heading cord was not found in the content region, and it gave you a link to the page.
Cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I like the link to the page.
Yeah. So this, when I first installed Behat and ran these, I was like, oh my God, that's so cool. And I went and spent like 2 hours on Drupal.org pulling different things and just writing different scenarios and running. I logged in as my own user and checked for certain things on my profile page and yeah. So I was like, this rocks.
And it's so much better than unit. Unit tests are great, like you said, for complex pieces of logic, but you hit the limit of what you can is actually useful to actually write quite quickly.
Yeah.
Whereas acceptance testing end to end is much more useful.
And when you've got a test that, or the client calls you and says such and such is not where it's supposed to be, you can actually, based upon a
Right,
conversation
test
with the client, sit down and write an acceptance test and run it and see the test fail and go, yep, you're right, it's not where it's supposed to be. And then you can use that acceptance test to troubleshoot and fix the problem. And then when your acceptance test passes, you fix the problem. I'm against the actual Drupal site. I'm going to actually write a scenario that has a step in it that doesn't map to a predefined PHP callback, and show you what Behat will give you when that happens to help you craft that callback so that you can then have a test for that one. Let's see. let's see.
I can see how this will work a lot with the workbench module, trying to figure out what people have access to and all that stuff.
Actually, that would be writing a bunch of tests to make sure people with the right roles can do the right things. Because that's, your permissions are, towards the end of a project, you start having to log in with actual users with the correct role and nothing works right. Yeah, and you have to go through and do all of
Yeah, I
See
picked
what
up your
you've done.
technique though. Have
Extend.
one account in one browser, another account in another browser. It's much easier than masquerade.
Masquerade, yeah.
Yeah, I run Safari, Chrome, and Firefox all at the same time. Two different users and an admin.
We actually have a student worker who I set up an account with today and made him go and copy and paste a bunch of content over to our new site.
I mean, you know,
think
that's
that
all,
one will-
when you have an intern, that's always a valid way.
That's how I
But
started.
it is.
That's how we both started.
Do you need a new line between the scenarios, or?
I don't think so. I think it'll get rid. Let's put one in there just in case, just for readability.
Clear.
Okay, so on this particular one, then I should see a download form. I don't think that's going to map to any of the predefined steps.
Want me to find out?
Then the hat. Yep, see it's spit it out in yellow. Now it's going to tell you when it gets through that that's undefined. So we have an undefined step, and then it has given me the code snippet that I need to put in my features context.php file so that I can code that particular test. And it gave me also the regular expression. I should see a download form. Didn't map to anything similar to a step that was already specified. So that is your actual test.
If it had recognized something close, that's a question.
It would have, yeah. But a failing test throws an exception. So whenever you actually write your code, you're going to want to throw an exception. And then if the test doesn't throw an exception, that particular code block is considered to have passed. So when you're writing your actual test, when you find yourself with a scenario or a step that you need to code, then you want to code it to throw an exception if it fails. And by throwing the exception, Behat will detect that as a failure. If you don't throw an exception, then it's going to assume that it passed. So pretty much you just copy that in, paste it in your feature context.php file, and then code that particular method. So it's pretty helpful if you've got someone that has written some tests in business domain language for the client, and the client has signed off on them, and for some particular reason those particular tests didn't map to one that's already predefined. Then you have the ability to easily know exactly how you need to name the function, exactly what your regular expression is going to look like, and it gives you the stubbed out function. So pretty much all you got to do is write the test code.
Fantastic.
Yeah. All right. So we ran a few black box tests against Drupal.org. Now let's actually run some tests using some stuff on a local install that I have, and this is actually going to use a mode. There's two different modes in the Drupal extension. There's one called running test in API mode and running test in Drush mode. So we're going to run some tests in API mode, and it's actually going to log into the site, create users, create roles, and do certain things in API mode. And so these are tests that you're not going to want to run against a live site. And you're going to want to run these tests on a machine where you have access to the database. So if I tried to execute any of these tests against Drupal.org, it would throw an error and tell me that I can't do that.
So it's actually writing to the database.
Yes. Yeah, these
Not
tests.
good idea.
Yeah, these tests will write to the database.
Okay.
So black box mode you can run against a live site, and you're not going to do any more damage than you would do if you were a regular user logging in and doing stuff. But these tests are actually going to create things in the database. So this is where we're going to use statements like, given I am a user with this role, when I do this, I should see that. Let's see now. We have YAML. local.com, I think is what I called it. I think that's all I need to do to specify.
Didn't you specify a black box somewhere?
But if you'll notice my YAML file had a whole bunch more stuff in there. We're going to go back and look at it in just a second.
Oh, you got two different ones. Oh,
Yep. Move api.feature.txt to api.feature. Now I renamed that test called API feature. All of your tests need to be put in that features folder and need to have the .feature extension. If it's got the .feature extension on it, then Behat's going to execute it unless you specifically tell Behat not to. And you can do that. You can say, I don't want to run these particular scenarios, or I only want to run this particular feature. And then you do that by, I think it's bin/Behat, and then you actually give the feature name. And it will execute only that feature. So, api.feature. All right, so these features are actually going to use, some of these are going to use Drush. So this particular scenario is going to create and log in as a user. So it's going to create a user with the authenticated user role. It's going to log in as that user. It's going to surf to the My Account page, and it's going to look for the heading history. Here again, second one, given I am logged in as a user with the administrator role, so what that specific function does is it goes to your database, it creates a user, it gives that user the administrator role, then it logs in as that user. When I go to admin structure types and I click manage fields in the article row, so you can get very specific on what it is that you're testing for, then I should see this. I should be on this page and I should see this. And all of these tests, these are all, like I said, if you go to the Drupal extension for Behat on the Drupal.org site and you pull the Git repository, you'll get all of these already pre-specified. It gives you a place to actually start playing with. Now, there, right there, that particular scenario is going to create a node. So it's going to create an article with text in the body. And then that one is going to create an article. And then it's going to check for certain things. That one's going to create a user called Joe User. Going to give that user the administrator role. Then it's going to surf to admin/people, and it's going to look for a link to Joe User's user page. And that one right there is going to log in as test user and then make sure that the logout link shows up. And these are all, I'm running all of these against just a Drupal installation that I've done absolutely nothing to, so I've just installed Drupal. That's all that this particular installation has on it. Let's see. Where's my browser? So all those tests that we're about to kick off are going to run against this particular install. Bin Behat API.feature. So now I'm specifying that I actually want to run just that particular feature set. Invalid argument, can't find, so what I do, okay. Features, it's there. No, I created it. All right, black box feature to blackbox feature.txt.
Yes, use it first.
Aha, we got an exception. Got a couple of them that failed. So we had two tests in that particular set that failed. Looked like they were both around creating a user with the administrator role. Given I'm logged in as a user with the administrator role, that threw an exception.
Do you have to give it a user account to log into, or does it create a new one?
No, it creates a new one. You can give it an account. That actually falls under the black box testing.
is it doing something under the hood,
Mm-hmm.
like naughty to get that to work? Is it? Oh, okay.
It's actually using, I think it uses a drush command, or it may be using a Drupal API command that creates a user
Okay.
and gives it a role. So given I am logged in as a user with so both of these failed on the administrator role. Both of the tests that failed. I saw two of them.
So if you go to
Given
the
I'm
site
logged
now
in
and
as
log
user-
in, you should see Joe user and.
It actually is supposed to remove those users.
Oh, it is.
But we can log in and see if it's
Just
there.
interested.
Really? But I believe that it removes. No, that particular test failed, so that some of those users are still there because the feature set didn't complete.
Remember for 7 hours, I guess that's something else, but looks of it.
That may have been the ones that I ran this morning.
It's my favourite admin.
All right, I'm trying to figure out why that one failed. It may be that I don't have, let's see, exception thrown, submit or image or login or contains. It's looking for something. And chunks data, URL, XP local. I may not have something specified right in my YAML file. Behat. One of the things that Drupal, that you'll see, I've got a bunch more information in my YAML file than you all had.
But you also have that black box tilde thing, didn't you?
And that's okay.
Oh, it's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Here I'm running the API driver in Drupal mode. If I actually wanted to run it in Drush mode, I would change that to Drush. But I've got some setup here that says here's where, for Drush mode, here's where the root is for the site that I want to test against. And then for Drupal mode, here's where the root is for the site I want to test against. And those are the same thing. The region map and the selectors was what I wanted to show you. This is actually specific to Drupal. These are built in as the Drupal extension. The region map is where you can actually give a particular region based upon a CSS selector an English name. So my CSS selector for the content region that you saw specified in some of those steps is actually, Behat will actually go to the particular page that you've specified, and it will look for some sort of an HTML element with that particular CSS selector in it. So it's going to look for something with the content ID in it, or the footer ID. For the left header, we've used header left, header right, the sidebar region. So you can give all those regions English names, and then you can specify in your YAML file what your CSS selectors are for that. So you can customize this for your specific theme. If you've deviated from the standard Bardic regions in your theme, then you can specify what your particular theme has based upon the CSS selectors that were built. The message selectors, the selectors are also another, and this is specific for messages. So you can specify that your message selector for messages is the class .messages. For error messages, it's the class messages error, messages status, and messages warning, but you can give those English-like names. This right here may be what's throwing that, because I was playing with Phantom.js this morning. So let's see if it'll run now without failing. Yep, that's what was throwing it. Yeah, that was my Phantom.js playing I was doing this morning. And I believe that all of those artifacts should now be wiped out. That one didn't, probably because that was where I was messing with things this morning, and that was just kind of hanging out there. But couple of those tests created content. Yeah, and it erased the content that it created when it ran the test, Lee. So that, yeah, that answers your question. All right.
Cool. And then we'll do
Cool.
the-
Who's ready to go start writing acceptance tests?